Money is not the reward. It's the permission field. That's a quote from the healer Aima Being, and well, it's a seemingly simple phrase, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But it really opens a fascinating door, maybe even a bit of an overlooked one, into the whole world of spiritual service.
Absolutely. It cuts right to the heart of some complex dynamics.
Yeah, because, so many of us feel drawn to these spiritual callings where we go on these personal quests for healing. We see them as sacred, as pure endeavors.
Right. The intention is usually incredibly positive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then how can something that feels so beautiful, so well-intentioned, sometimes lead to, well, burnout or disappointment or even, these really unhealthy kind of distorted dynamics?
It's a crucial question.
So that's what today's deep dive is all about.
Hmm.
We're heading into what we're calling the shadow side of spiritual service. It's a journey, really, into the nuances, the often unseen stuff like soul contracts, the impact of trauma, and these really intricate energy exchanges that happen.
Yeah, between healers and the people seeking healing. And our mission today for this deep dive is exactly that, to try and shine a light on these often hidden dynamics. We've got a great stack of sources to draw from. We're looking at articles, some cutting-edge research, and also Aima Being's own notes on her Wakamatsu Approach Protocol, which is fascinating in itself.
Yeah, I'm really interested to get into that.
So the goal is really to pull out the most important insights, the nuanced bits about how these pure intentions can sometimes, subtly go off track.
Right, go awry.
Exactly. And maybe more importantly, how we can bring them back into alignment, back into integrity.
Okay.
We really want to give you, the listener, a kind of shortcut here to get you well-informed, equipped with maybe some surprising facts, definitely practical perspectives, stuff you can use to understand your own experiences, whether you're, acting as a healer, a guide, or if you're the one on that path seeking healing yourself.
Okay, so before we really dive headfirst into the shadows, maybe we should set the stage a bit. Paint a picture of the ideal.
Good idea. Let's establish the baseline.
Because in, countless spiritual traditions, right, all over the world, there's this deep belief that healers and seekers don't just bump into each other by chance, that they actually enter into these soul contracts.
Right. Not literal contracts, obviously.
No, not like signing on the dotted line. More like these sacred agreements made at a soul level. Sometimes the belief is, even before we, incarnate here.
Yeah, agreements for mutual growth, for evolution.
Exactly. So when you feel that pull, that almost magnetic call to serve others spiritually,
right,
when you feel really drawn to a specific healer or a teaching.
That strong connection.
Yeah, that's often seen as this sacred covenant playing out, a kind of preordained link designed to help with this specific part of your soul's journey.
And understanding that initial idea of a sacred covenant is so crucial.
Why is that?
Because it really highlights the immense potential, almost limitless, of that kind of connection. It's intended to be a journey for deep healing, profound growth, mutual evolution for everyone involved.
Right, that's the aspiration, the highest possibility.
Exactly, that's the vision. But it's also the essential baseline we need before we start exploring where and how the shadows can creep in, how they can subtly distort that beautiful, pure, original intention. If we know the ideal, we can spot the deviations more clearly.
Okay, so we've got this beautiful, almost pristine picture of soul contracts, the sacred ideal. But now, let's pull back the curtain a bit. Let's look at something that maybe challenges that ideal, adds a real layer of complexity.
Right, where the human element comes in.
Exactly. What happens when that pristine spiritual energy meets the very human landscape of our own unhealed pain? Or wounds.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting, and often where the shadow starts to emerge, often unseen.
So it's when that sacred calling, that soul contract, gets filtered through our own personal woundedness.
Precisely. Through our individual histories, our unresolved stuff, the unconscious patterns we've all developed just by being human.
And this leads us to something called the wounded healer archetype, right? I've heard that term.
Yes, it's well known in psychology and in spiritual circles too. And it's fascinating because it's so paradoxical. It has this dual potential.
Dual potential? How so?
Well, on one hand, it can be an incredibly powerful source of empathy. Think about it. A healer who has personally navigated their own darkness.
Walk through the fire, so to speak.
Exactly. Someone who has truly suffered and come through it, they can connect with the client's pain on a really visceral, authentic level. much more deeply, perhaps, than someone who hasn't had similar struggles.
Okay, that makes sense. It creates trust, understanding.
It does, but, and here's the tricky part, the insidious part. If that healer's own trauma isn't just experienced, but truly resolved, integrated, healed.
Right, if it's still active, essentially.
Yes. Then their service, their healing work, might unconsciously carry that baggage. It gets projected into the dynamic.
Can you give an example of how that might look?
Sure. Imagine a healer who, say, experienced significant abandonment early in life. Really deep abandonment wounds.
Okay.
They might completely unconsciously develop this deep-seated need for their client's constant praise or reassurance or even dependence.
So the client needing them actually feeds something in the healer.
Exactly. It's not malicious. It's usually a subconscious drive, but it subtly warps the dynamic. The healing becomes less about the client's actual independent needs.
And more about the healer's unmet needs.
Precisely. It subtly turns that sacred space into a kind of reenactment of the healer's past pain. The core insight here is that the wound isn't just a source of compassion.
It can become a trap.
It can. A hidden trap that subtly prevents the client from reaching full independence because the healer's subconscious needs are actually being met by the client staying reliant.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's quite chilling when you put it like that. And what strikes me is how subtle this can be. It's not like overt manipulation.
No, rarely. It's usually under the surface.
So how can these unconscious needs, even if they come from a good place,
Yeah.
how do they actively skew the energy without anyone really realizing it? What are the signs?
Well, often the very first signs are just a vague sense of unease or an energetic imbalance that you can't quite put your finger on.
Okay, like something just feels off.
Yeah. For the healer, it might show up as feeling unusually attached to one client's progress, or feeling personally rejected if a client leaves or questions them, or this unconscious craving for constant positive feedback.
Right, taking things personally.
Yes. And for the seeker, it might feel like an uncomfortable dependency. Like, I can't function without my healer's advice, or a subtle fear of disappointing the healer, of not living up to their expectations. And remember, this projection, this bringing our whole history into the relationship, it's not just the healer doing it.
Ah, right. It goes both ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
A seeker can project powerful figures onto the healer, too. Maybe a parent they longed for approval from, or an idealized savior figure, or even problematic authority figures from their past.
So they're kind of replaying old dramas.
Exactly. Unconsciously replaying old traumas, hoping that this time, with this spiritual guide, the outcome will be different. That this person will finally give them the validation or the miracle cure they never got before.
It's like dragging your whole family history, baggage and all, into the healing room.
That's a great way to put it. The whole album, yeah. Unresolved stories, unfulfilled desires, all projected onto the present moment.
Yeah, the source we looked at nails it. We project a lot onto our teachers, and many dynamics are at play beyond the conscious intention of the arrangement.
That phrase is key.
Beyond the conscious intention.
Yeah.
It means it's not deliberate, right? It's these unconscious patterns we've built up over years.
Exactly. Coping mechanisms, relational habits.
And these projections, they turn what should be this empowering spiritual journey into, well, a real tangle. Unmet needs, unspoken expectations, subtle power imbalances. And nobody's fully aware of it.
Like invisible strings pulling everything off course.
Yeah.
And that's what makes them so insidious, so hard to address without a really high degree of self-awareness or introspection. Often you need outside help, like supervision or therapy, to even see them clearly.
And if these projections just keep going unchecked.
Well, the genuine healing progress can get seriously impacted. Sometimes it just stalls completely.
So instead of real growth, you just get stuck.
You can get stagnation, yeah. Or repeated patterns of dependency or frustration, or even this codependent dynamic where nobody really transforms because everyone's unconscious needs are being met by staying in the dynamic, even if it's painful.
All while thinking it's legitimate spiritual work.
Precisely. The energy gets dense, heavy, burdened by all that past stuff.
Okay, speaking of unconscious drivers, let's talk about fear. Specifically, scarcity, fear of not having enough money or recognition or success. How does that distort these energetic contracts? It feels like a big one in modern spirituality.
Oh, it's huge. Absolutely huge. And its effects are significant, really, on both sides of the equation.
How so? Let's start with the healer's side.
Okay. From the healer's perspective, a deep fear of lack, not enough clients, not enough income, maybe not enough respect or recognition.
The struggle is real for many.
It is. And that fear can lead them to overextend themselves energetically. giving way too much unsustainably. Or sometimes they might subtly start treating their sacred work as a means to personal validation rather than just pure service.
So needing clients to prove their worth.
Yeah, unconsciously tying their income or their client numbers to their spiritual effectiveness instead of just, trusting the process and allowing the divine to work through them.
Which leads to?
Often self-sacrifice followed by burnout and resentment. We'll definitely dig into burnout more later.
Okay, and on the seeker's side, how does scarcity show up there?
Well, a seeker operating from scarcity might cling desperately to the healer's attention, or demand instant miracles, or feel entitled to constant access, like needing proof they're being cared for or that they're worthy.
Driven by their own sense of lack.
Often, yes. An unconscious belief that if they don't grab everything right now, they'll miss their only chance at healing or enlightenment. A kind of spiritual FOMO almost.
Fear of missing out, yeah. It's like that fluid, open spiritual covenant we started with suddenly becomes this rigid, legalistic contract.
Exactly, with all this unspoken fine print.
The healer unconsciously expects constant gratitude, maybe loyalty. The seeker expects all problems fixed, like magic.
Right. Instant results, no effort required on their part.
And how often do we do that on all our relationships, even professional ones? Bring in these unspoken expectations that just set us up for disappointment or conflict.
It's a universal human thing, for sure. But in spiritual context, it feels like it carries extra weight, doesn't it? Because of the sacredness involved.
Definitely. The stakes feel higher.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've outlined some pretty significant shadows. How do we start shifting this? What's the antidote to these distortions, this rigidity, these unspoken contracts?
Well, interestingly, if we look beyond our modern context, if we look at diverse, ancient, and indigenous healing traditions, there's a really powerful, almost universal theme that emerges.
And what's that?
Reciprocity. Balanced energy exchange. It's not just about, paying a bill. It's something much, much deeper. It's seen as a fundamental principle of cosmic harmony, of keeping things in balance.
Okay, reciprocity. Tell me more.
Yeah. Lissa Rankin, the physician and author, she points this out really well in her work, and it's true across millennia, across continents. She says, every spiritual tradition seems to have its own version of the devotional practice of offering.
Offering, giving back.
Exactly. This practice of conscious offering, it isn't just about commerce. It's fundamentally about fostering deep respect. It's about ensuring energy flows freely, vibrantly. And it's about expressing gratitude.
So it's a two-way street, energetically speaking.
Absolutely. A dynamic, living two-way street, not just a static, one-way consumption of services or spiritual knowledge.
Which is quite different from the model we often see today, right? The sort of service provider consumer thing.
Very different. That model often focuses solely on what one gets, what one extracts, rather than the mutual contribution, the circular flow.
Okay, so to really get this idea of balanced exchange, let's maybe look at some specific examples. Where do we see this in action?
Well, a powerful example comes from high in the Andes, the Quero shamans, who are direct descendants of the Inca.
Okay.
They live by a principle called Ayni, sacred reciprocity. And it's not just a philosophy for them. It's like the very breath of their community, their relationship with nature, their understanding of energy itself.
Ayni. So what does it mean exactly?
It's often translated as reciprocity, but it's richer than just tit for tat. It really means give and receive in equal measure and with equal heart.
Equal heart. I like that.
Yeah, it's about fostering this circular, living balance of life force in all interactions, recognizing that everything, everyone is interconnected.
And what are the implications of that? How does it guard against the shadows we talked about?
Well, the implications are profound. Rankin highlights this: if you only give and never receive, if you're metaphorically only breathing out.
You can get depleted.
Exactly. Exhausted. It leads to burnout, illness. It's like a slow metaphorical death from lack of life force for the healer.
Okay.
But conversely, if you only take without giving back, if you hoard resources or act entitled to wisdom or blessing.
Also break the flow.
Right. The energy flow is broken. It leads to stagnation, disconnection, imbalance, even illness, because the energetic system gets clogged up.
So for real healing to happen, within any religion, both sides have to participate fully.
Yes. The healer must receive as well as give, allowing themselves to be supported, replenished, and the client or the community must give as well as receive.
How do they make this tangible?
They often ritualize it beautifully. It makes the exchange explicit and sacred. A patient might offer tobacco or coca leaves or food, or maybe a small handmade gift to the shaman.
Before or after the healing?
Could be either or both, but it's not seen as just a fee like we think of it.
Right. It's symbolic.
Highly symbolic. It's an act of consent, of profound gratitude, and it's an active investment of their own energy into the healing process. It anchors the whole thing in mutual respect and active participation. It's like saying a deep yes to the work.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? How do we ensure that kind of balanced energy flow in our own important relationships? Beyond just money.
It's a great question for reflection. Acknowledging the intangible energetic contributions, the subtle give and take.
Yeah. It's not just for spiritual work, is it? It applies everywhere.
Absolutely. Now, if we travel from the Andes to Africa, we see really similar principles with traditional healers, like the Zulu Sangoma in southern Africa.
The Sangoma.
Yes. These healers are deeply supported by their communities through exchange, and there's a profound acknowledgement of the intense, often lifelong, training they undergo.
And you mentioned outsiders often misunderstand the cost involved.
Yes, that's fascinating. One African healer put it perfectly. They said something like, most lay people don't see the labor involved in becoming a Sangoma, and they complain about prices. You're not paying for the hours worked, but for all the ceremonies and healing work they've done to get this experience.
Wow. That's a huge shift in perspective.
Isn't it?
So the payment, whether it's money or goods or service, it's not just for the hours spent with you.
Not at all. It honors the accumulated energy, the wisdom gained over years, the sacrifices made, the lifelong dedication to the craft, the initiations, the mastery.
It's an investment in their whole being, their whole journey, and the lineage they carry.
Precisely. And you see this powerfully in ceremonies like the Magidi initiation gatherings for Sangoma trainees. These can go on for days, even weeks.
And the whole community gets involved.
The entire village often contributes. Food, labor, gifts, support. It profoundly underscores that healing isn't just a private transaction. It's a communal affair, a shared responsibility, a reciprocal recognition of a vital role.
It really broadens the whole idea beyond just a simple fee.
It does, and this communal long-term view of supporting healers, valuing their lifetime dedication, it could really reshape how we in the West often perceive a healer's worth and compensation, which tends to be so individualistic and hour-focused.
It asks us to think about the energetic cost of real wisdom, not just the time on the clock.
Exactly.
Okay, one more ancient example. Let's go to ancient India, the Vedic culture.
Yeah.
You mentioned Guru Dakshina.
Yes, the guru-disciple tradition. This formalized the concept of reciprocal exchange beautifully through Guru Dakshina.
So what was that exactly?
Well, in ancient India, after students spent years living with, serving, and learning from their spiritual teacher, their guru.
Often a very intensive process.
Very. At the end of that period, or sometimes at key points, the student would offer a dakshina to their guru. And this wasn't just a casual thank you gift. It was seen as a profound act of spiritual and energetic completion.
Okay. And critically, it wasn't seen as tuition.
No, the sources are clear. This offering was not seen as a commercial tuition fee, but rather a sacred duty and gesture of thanks.
So what form could it take?
It varied widely. It depended on the student's means, the guru's needs. It could be money, precious goods, maybe a specific service performed for the guru or the ashram, or even a commitment to ongoing support.
But the essence was the same.
The essence was profound, honoring the invaluable knowledge and guidance received by giving back fully, ensuring that the bond, the guru-shishya relationship, was more than a transactional exchange. It completed the circuit.
So bringing this all together for today,
Right.
What's the takeaway? The offering, whether it's money, service, a gift, it acts as an energy contract.
That's a great way to put it. Yes. It's a powerful, conscious way to align both parties with the integrity of the exchange. And critically, it prevents the gift of teaching or healing from being taken for granted.
Because when the energy isn't acknowledged or reciprocated, that's when the imbalance starts. That's when the shadow creeps in.
Exactly. That lack of conscious exchange creates an opening for distortion. So these ancient insights, they really give us a strong framework, a deep wisdom for building safeguards into our modern spiritual contracts.
Safeguards against the very distortions that our modern Western approaches sometimes overlook, maybe in their focus on individualism or commercial efficiency.
Precisely. They remind us of the importance of the energetic balance. So, in contrast to these ancient systems with their built-in safeguards for balance and reciprocity, a lot of modern Western spiritual work has kind of neglected these principles.
Right, and that neglect has consequences.
Significant consequences, yes, for both healers and seekers. It creates new kinds of shadows in these seemingly pure spaces. And one of the most common, most pervasive shadows we see is healer burnout.
Ah, yes, burnout. It's a really serious issue, isn't it? Not just feeling a bit tired.
Not at all. It's devastating. Imagine a healer truly fueled by compassion, maybe a deep spiritual calling.
Really wanted to help.
Genuinely. But they're operating without clear energetic boundaries or without a real understanding of that reciprocal exchange we just talked about. So they give and give and give, pouring out their life force.
Until the tank is empty.
Completely empty. As one source put it, if you're a healer, you know that your tireless dedication to others can take a toll on your own well-being.
And the symptoms aren't just physical tiredness.
No. Burnout, clinically, involves severe emotional exhaustion, a profound loss of empathy, sometimes called compassion fatigue. You might see cynicism creeping in, and often chronic physical ailments that don't seem to have a clear medical cause.
It's like the soul crying out.
It really is.
Yeah.
From that soul contract perspective we started with, burnout is like this blaring red warning light.
Signaling imbalance.
A severe, often dangerous, energetic imbalance. Usually because the healer is consistently overgiving, maybe driven by a subconscious need to prove their worth or a savior complex, or simply not receiving enough energetic, emotional, or financial support in return.
It's a deficit model of service.
Exactly. And when burnout isn't addressed, it doesn't just hurt the healer, though it can devastate them, leading to illness, despair, disillusionment.
It also impacts the seekers.
Directly. They end up getting diminished care, maybe from someone who's depleted or cynical. Or worse, they might feel abandoned if the healer just collapses, withdraws, or even starts resenting the very people they're trying to help.
It's a lose-lose situation, really, born from an unsustainable energy model.
Completely.
Okay, this brings up another key point, especially when we bridge ancient wisdom with modern psychology. How do things like projection and transference play out in these spiritual settings? And how do they distort things?
Yes. Projection and transference. Huge factors. We see it constantly. Seekers frequently project familiar roles onto their teachers or healers.
Like parent figures.
Parent figures, idealized partners, maybe even difficult sibling dynamics, or powerful authority figures from their past.
And this is just a natural human thing.
It is. We all carry these internal relational templates, formed usually in childhood, and they deeply influence how we connect with others, especially authority figures or caregivers.
But in a spiritual context, it gets complicated.
Very complicated, especially if it stays unconscious and unaddressed. Because, as psychology integrated with spiritual insight shows us, transference goes both ways.
Ah, right. It's not just the seeker projecting.
No. Both student and teacher will inevitably bring old relational hopes and fears to the relationship, so the teacher can project too.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, maybe a student idealizes the teacher as infallible, perfect, this all-knowing savior, or conversely, a teacher unconsciously starts expecting endless admiration, total deference, unquestioning loyalty from their students.
In either case, they're not seeing the real person.
Exactly. They're relating to a projection, an archetype, not the actual flawed, complex human being in front of them. And the original soul contract, which was about mutual growth, gets totally tangled up in these old, unresolved wounds.
You're just playing out old scripts again.
Instead of creating new, healthy patterns, yes.
And Western observers, especially those studying cults or spiritual abuse, they've seen where this can lead, haven't they?
Tragically, yes. Unaddressed transference can lead to truly heartbreaking disruptions. Guru-disciple relationships turning toxic, even cult-like. We've seen so many scandals over the decades in ashrams, meditation centers, all sorts of spiritual groups.
How does it typically unfold?
Often, the student starts by idealizing the teacher almost to a superhuman level. Then the teacher, maybe they're not equipped to handle that level of adoration, or they're unaware of their own unhealed ego.
They get seduced by it.
Yeah, seduced by the emotional gratification, as one source puts it. They start to ignore their own shadow, their own flaws, their need for accountability, and that quickly sets the stage for ethical violations and abuse.
And what started as a compassionate soul contract
Can devolve into something called trauma bonding, which is even more insidious than just simple dependency.
Trauma bonding, what exactly is that in this context?
It's an intense, often irrational emotional attachment that forms specifically in the presence of an abuse dynamic. Think about it. You get intermittent validation from the teacher, a moment of praise, a feeling of breakthrough, feeling seen or chosen.
Mixed with negative experiences.
Exactly. Mixed with disappointment, neglect, criticism, maybe even manipulation. This unpredictable reinforcement creates a really powerful psychological hook.
So the seeker keeps chasing the good feelings.
Desperately, hoping to get back to that good phase, the original promise. It keeps both parties stuck, reenacting old wounds and power imbalances. The seeker isn't just dependent. They're hooked into this cycle, desperately wanting the teacher to be the savior they first appeared to be.
So the very people seeking healing end up reenacting their deepest wounds, just dressed up in spiritual clothes, because the unconscious stuff was never dealt with.
That's the tragic reality in these distorted cases.
Okay. Building on these Western therapy ideas, we also need to talk about entitlement, right? In spiritual settings.
Yes. Entitlement is another major shadow, and it's basically the belief, conscious or not, that you deserve certain treatment, specific outcomes, or special privileges because of your actions, your status, or your spiritual efforts.
How does that look from the seeker side?
Well, it can sound almost transactional. Like, I've meditated every day, I prayed, I paid my fast, so the guru owes me enlightenment, or they owe me constant attention, or where's my miracle cure? I paid for it.
Right, like putting coins in a vending machine and expecting enlightenment to pop out.
Exactly. One Buddhist teacher observed Western students sometimes feel if we have followed our mentor's instructions, we have earned the right for acknowledgement and praise, an entitlement to receive them.
Treating spiritual growth like a reward system. I did the work. Where's my prize?
Precisely. And that mindset just clashes fundamentally with the reality of soul work, which is often nonlinear, unpredictable, challenging.
So when the expected results don't show up on demand?
It leads to these crises of faith, resentment, feeling cheated by the path itself.
And entitlement isn't just a seeker issue, is it?
Not at all. It can deeply affect healers and teachers, too. After years of service, dedication, maybe sacrifice, a healer might unconsciously develop this sense of spiritual inflation.
Thinking they're special, owed something.
Yeah. Believing they're owed absolute deference, unquestioning loyalty, maybe excessive material support. They might start acting like the normal rules or ethical boundaries don't apply to them because of their gifts or their role.
That sounds like spiritual narcissism.
That's exactly what it's sometimes called. The ego co-opts the spiritual identity, the authority, to elevate itself, demand special treatment, and crucially, avoid accountability.
And we see the extreme end of this too, unfortunately.
Yes, in those tragic cases where gurus demand luxury, obedience, even sexual favors, and they rationalize it, they claim it's a blessing for the student, or part of the path, or divine will.
But it's really a profound distortion. A corruption of the original service contract.
A deep egoic corruption, and this is where Western psychological frameworks are so helpful. By emphasizing healthy boundaries, transparency, accountability, supervision, trauma-informed practices, they give us tools to shine a light on these shadows.
Tools to restore mutual growth, integrity, authenticity.
Exactly. To bring things back into alignment.
Okay, so when this trauma, these unmet needs, really seep into that sacred pact between healer and seeker, what does it actually look like? How do these shadows play out in real life, often painfully?
Well, one incredibly common pattern, a pervasive dynamic, is what's often called the rescuer-victim loop.
The rescuer-victim loop. Okay, break that down.
In this dynamic, the healer, maybe unconsciously, sees the seeker as fundamentally broken, helpless, needing to be saved, and they cast themselves as the savior.
Now the seeker.
The seeker, maybe subtly or maybe quite overtly, sees themselves as helpless too, unable to progress, maybe even unworthy, without the healer's constant help.
And initially that might feel good.
It can feel very validating for both initially. The healer feels needed, valuable, powerful. It feeds that desire to help, maybe to be seen as benevolent.
And the seeker feels cared for, seen, maybe relieved of responsibility.
Exactly, but
yeah.
It's fundamentally disempowering for the seeker in the long run.
How so?
It subtly but powerfully prevents them from accessing their own inner resources, their own strength, their innate ability to heal themselves.
And it overburdens the healer.
Creates an unsustainable weight of expectation, yes. So instead of guiding the seeker towards their own autonomy, the healer inadvertently reinforces the idea that they are the only source of healing.
Turning the soul contract into a relationship of dependence.
Deep, unhealthy dependence. The seeker learns to rely on outside validation, and the healer gets maybe subtly addicted to being indispensable.
It can get even darker than that, where the shadow really takes hold.
It can. If the seeker starts showing real growth, starts asserting their independence, maybe even challenges the healer in a healthy way.
The healer might feel threatened.
Subconsciously, yes. Threatened by no longer being needed. And they might, again, unconsciously, subtly sabotage that progress, or maybe create new crises for the seeker to need help with.
Wow. That's a really dark side of spiritual entitlement, where the healer feels entitled to the client staying dependent.
Even at the expense of the client's actual liberation, yes. They might unconsciously prolong the healing to maintain that bond, that feeling of being needed.
Okay, what's another distorted dynamic we see?
Another really painful one is projection and blame, especially when the healing doesn't go as planned or expected.
Right, when the miracle doesn't happen or the teacher shows flaws.
Exactly. Then the sacred relationship can sour really quickly into this vicious cycle of blame.
How does that play out?
The seeker, maybe feeling desperate or disappointed, might feel betrayed. You were supposed to fix me. Why isn't this working? It's your fault.
Or the healer might flip it.
Yes. The healer, maybe feeling overwhelmed or criticized, might lash out and blame the seeker. You're not faithful enough. You're not practicing right. You're resisting. You're not doing the work.
Which creates that trauma-bonded cycle you mentioned earlier.
Precisely. That mix of intermittent validation and profound disappointment creates this unhealthy emotional attachment. It tragically keeps both parties stuck, just reenacting old wounds instead of healing them.
And in extreme cases.
We've seen seekers endure manipulation, emotional abuse, financial exploitation, all under the guise of tough love or spiritual tests, because they're trauma bonded. It's a devastating pattern seen in cults, abusive therapy. The original soul contract becomes a kind of karmic trap.
Where the pain just repeats and deepens.
Deepening the very wounds it was supposed to mend.
Now, it's important to say, not all these shadow dynamics are that extreme, right? Not outright abuse.
Absolutely not. In fact, most of the time they show up as much subtler things, like quiet spiritual burnout or frustration, unspoken resentment simmering under the surface.
Okay, like what? Give me some examples of the subtler stuff.
Sure. Maybe a healer, outwardly calm, starts feeling really unappreciated, secretly resentful if clients cancel often or show up late or question their methods.
Triggering old wounds in the healer.
Exactly. Old rejection wounds, maybe abandonment wounds, and it might lead them to withdraw emotionally or become subtly cynical or make little passive-aggressive digs.
And on the seeker's side.
A seeker might feel intensely jealous of the healer's attention towards other students, regressing almost to a childlike competition for the guru's love or validation.
And these feelings can be hard for spiritual people to admit.
Deeply humiliating or confusing sometimes. People often think, I should be beyond all that, or believe these lower emotions don't belong on a spiritual path, so they hide them, keep them in the shadow, unspoken, even from themselves.
But they fester.
They fester in silence, building pressure, and these unconscious expectations. My healer should always be available. My student should never challenge me. They form these unspoken contracts that are totally out of alignment with the soul's real intention.
And when reality doesn't match those unspoken expectations.
Conflict erupts. It could be quiet disengagement, just drifting away, or it could be dramatic breakoffs, even public splits within a spiritual community, leaving a lot of hurt and confusion behind.
So the consequences of these distortions, these unaddressed shadows, they're really profound for everyone involved.
They truly are. For the seeker, it can be incredibly disillusioning. They might lose trust in spirituality altogether.
Confusing the messenger with the message.
Exactly, confusing human failings, the guide's wounds, with the invalidity of the divine itself. They throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Even for the healer.
The healer can become deeply disheartened, burn out completely, and leave the field. Or, conversely, they might become wildly ego-inflated, doubling down on grandiosity to avoid facing their own pain, their own unmet needs.
So either way, the original purpose gets lost.
Completely sidelined. The mutual evolution, the healing, it's replaced by repeating patterns of pain. The relationship itself, as one text puts it, can become a hell of its own making when fear and ego take over.
The tragic irony being that people who set out to alleviate suffering end up mirroring it or even magnifying it.
If they haven't done the work to integrate their own shadows, their own wounds, their own unconscious motivations, yes.
So, given all this, how can you, the listener, use this awareness to make sure your own spiritual journey, or really any deep relationship, stays on a path of real healing and authenticity, and doesn't just repeat old wounds?
It's a critical question, isn't it? Self-awareness is the first step.
Okay, so how do we start to realign things? How do we bring spiritual service back to its highest intention? How do we protect these sacred contracts from all the shadows we just explored?
Well, Aima Being, in her Wakamatsu Approach Protocol, offers a really revolutionary solution, and it directly tackles a topic that's often, well, contentious in spiritual circles.
Let me guess. Money.
You got it. Money.
Yeah, that's always a tricky one.
It is. Many people feel that charging money somehow taints the purity of spiritual work. They see it as inherently unspiritual, maybe greedy, definitely at odds with pure service.
But then others argue healers need to live, right?
Yeah.
They need to sustain themselves, keep learning.
Exactly. There's that practical reality. So Aima Being's protocol tackles this tension head on. It encourages us to view money differently, not as some dirty necessity or a capitalistic price tag that devalues the sacred,
But
as an extension of pure energy and as conscious consent.
Okay. Money as energy and consent. Unpack that.
The core idea is really powerful. Money can be sacred if we choose to see it that way. Aima specifically calls money exchanged in healing a quantum agreement, a light seal, a multidimensional yes.
Wow. A multi-dimensional yes.
Yeah, it's a tangible signal that conveys something profound and intangible. It says, I am ready. I am willing to fully receive this transformation, and I consciously honor your energy, your time, your wisdom, your sacrifice in facilitating it.
So it's an active co-creation, a shared investment in the process.
Exactly.
Now, what's striking about that is how much it echoes the ancient wisdom we talked about earlier, doesn't it? It doesn't actually sound new.
Not new at all, just perhaps reframed and consciously reintegrated for our modern world where money often carries so much baggage.
Right. Like the Guru Dakshina in India. That wasn't just a payment.
No, it was a profound symbol of the student's consent, respect, commitment, a vow of appreciation, an acknowledgement of the sacredness of the knowledge. It closed the energetic loop.
Ensuring the student valued what they received.
Made it impossible to take for granted, yes. And similarly, in the Andes, that offering the patient-made coca leaves, a small gift, maybe coins, it was like signing on the energetic dotted line.
Saying, I'm fully showing up, I'm invested, I reciprocate your energy.
Precisely. So when we consciously choose to treat money in spiritual contexts like this as consent-based energy, it changes everything. It removes the stigma, the awkwardness, the energetic imbalance that so often surrounds it.
It's not about a demanding healer or a reluctant client anymore.
No. Instead, both parties understand the exchange as an integral, sacred part of the healing process itself. The seeker empowers themselves by actively investing, literally valuing their healing, putting energy behind their intention.
And the healer receives the support they need.
The necessary, respectful support that lets them stay focused, replenish, pour their energy into the seeker without building up that covert resentment or fear of scarcity. It transforms money from a source of awkwardness or power imbalance into a clear conduit of mutual commitment.
Okay, let's make this really concrete. Can you paint those two scenarios again? The contrasting ways money can be handled.
Sure. Scenario 1. The well-intentioned healer says, I'll do this work for free, it's spiritual, but please donate if you can, whatever feels right.
Okay. Sounds generous, but...
But what happens? The client, maybe unsure of the value or feeling awkward obligation, tosses in a small, maybe unenthusiastic donation, or feels guilty. There's ambiguity, an energetic wobble.
Right. The healer maybe gave more than they felt was acknowledged.
Could develop subtle resentment, yeah. And the client took without a clear, committed investment. They might even value the experience less because they didn't fully invest.
Okay. Now, scenario 2.
Scenario 2. The healer clearly states their fee, or a suggested offering range, but they explicitly frame it. They say something like, this exchange is part of creating our sacred container. It ensures we're both fully present, accountable, and honoring the energy involved.
So the fee itself becomes part of the ritual, almost.
Exactly. And the client, by paying that fee, is consciously saying, yes, I fully commit to this. My yes is complete.
The result.
Clarity. A firm, energetic handshake. Much lower chance of unconscious resentment or entitlement sneaking in later. The consent is explicit, respected, the intention is clear.
Now, modern psychology might just call that setting good boundaries.
And it is good boundaries, absolutely. But on a spiritual level, it feels more profound, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's honoring money as energy. As energy that can either flow cleanly, with integrity, or get tangled up with shame, guilt, power issues, distortion. So by cleaning up our attitude towards money and spiritual service,
we clean up a major source of distortion in the relationship itself.
Exactly. Think about it. So many historical abuses in spiritual communities trace back to shadows around money, sex, or power. Money has often been the unaddressed taboo, a breeding ground for imbalance.
So when it's openly acknowledged as part of the sacred exchange,
it loses its shadowy, corrupting power. It just becomes another form of prana, life force being exchanged. The seeker gives financial energy. The healer gives healing energy, time, wisdom. Both give, both receive.
Which prevents the martyr-healer syndrome.
Yes, undercharging, overgiving, burning out, feeling exploited. And it also prevents the entitled client syndrome, assuming payment guarantees a cure or constant access. It fosters mutual respect.
And beyond the energy cleansing, you said it reinforces autonomy and accountability. How does that work?
Well, for the seeker, consciously consenting by investing tangible energy creates a powerful psychological commitment.
Skin in the game, so to speak.
Exactly. And that level of active investment often correlates with better outcomes. The seeker becomes an active participant, a co-creator, not just passively waiting to be fixed.
And for the healer.
Receiving that tangible, conscious consent is a constant, grounding reminder. I'm a partner here, a facilitator, not the unilateral savior holding all the cards.
So it fosters accountability on both sides?
Yes. If issues come up later, maybe the seeker feels things aren't progressing or the healer feels disrespected, they can go back to that initial agreement, symbolized by the exchange.
It gives a clear foundation for talking about boundaries.
A clear, objective foundation for those sometimes difficult conversations about boundaries and expectations. It stops misunderstandings from festering in the shadows, allows for real-time adjustments, deeper understanding.
Okay, so all these threads, the ancient wisdom, the psychological insights, reframing energy exchange, they all seem to come together in Aima Being's Wakamatsu Approach Protocol.
They really do. It's a synthesis.
And you mentioned this blueprint was downloaded during a deep meditation, a Gateway Void Focus 27 experience.
That's how Aima describes its origin, yes. For those who aren't familiar, Focus 27 in Robert Monroe's hemisync work is considered a very specific, expanded state of consciousness, often described as a sort of interlife area, a receiving station for souls, a realm of pure information beyond physical reality.
So the protocol came from this profound non-physical space.
According to Aima, yes, as a blueprint aimed at consciously realigning spiritual service by meticulously identifying and removing these energetic distortions we've been talking about.
And the name Wakamatsu, what's the significance there?
It's Japanese for young pine, and that's deeply symbolic. Pine trees represent renewal, resilience, integrity, longevity. So young pine suggests a return to fresh, clear, vital spiritual contracts.
Untainted by old wounds or ego or misconceptions.
Exactly. The protocol itself is this intricate weaving together of ancient wisdom, like the reciprocity we discussed, and contemporary psychological insights, much like our conversation today, really.
Yeah, it mirrors our deep dive. And what's the core principle?
At its heart, the Wakamatsu approach calls on both healers and seekers to do some deep, courageous self-examination before and during any sacred exchange, asking the fundamental question.
Which is?
Are we truly entering this exchange from love, wholeness, and integrity, or are we coming from a place of fear, scarcity, or an unhealed wound? That's the compass, the foundational check-in.
Okay, so practically, how does this translate? If you're a practitioner or someone seeking healing, what does implementing the Wakamatsu approach actually look like?
Well, it guides people to consciously put several key principles into practice. Definitely establishing those explicit energetic agreements, the consent-based exchange, using money or other offerings as sacred consent.
Right, making the energy clear.
Yes. It also strongly emphasizes routine, rigorous self-reflection for healers, really checking in with themselves regularly.
Asking things
Like, am I getting my validation fix from this interaction? Or am I genuinely just letting the divine work through me without ego interference, without needing anything from this client beyond our clear agreement?
that takes honesty.
A lot of honesty. And critically, it encourages incorporating simple but powerfully symbolic acts of ritual reciprocity within the healing sessions themselves.
Ritual reciprocity, like what?
It can be incredibly grounding. It could be as simple as starting and ending every session with a shared moment of mindful gratitude, maybe a silent nod to the spiritual forces involved.
Acknowledging the sacredness?
Yes. Or it might involve a symbolic offering of intention from the client. Maybe they hold a small stone representing their commitment. Or even just both people taking one conscious, mindful breath together to acknowledge the greater powers, the sacred space, the partnership.
So weaving these small rituals in helps keep things clean.
By consciously weaving these elements into the fabric of the relationship, the protocol aims to prevent those trauma filters, those ego distortions, from hijacking the pure soul contract. It creates this container of integrity, transparency, energetic cleanliness that really supports genuine transformation.
Okay, let's get even more specific. Can you give some examples straight from the Wakamatsu Protocol?
Absolutely. Imagine this. Setting the explicit intention, maybe spoken aloud briefly at the start of every session, that any money exchanged is sacred, it's sufficient, and it represents complete energetic consent for this specific session.
Okay, what does that do?
That simple upfront agreement means neither party carries unspoken expectations or those sticky energetic threads beyond that session. The healer isn't implicitly expected to save the client 24/7 beyond what was agreed for that session or series.
And the client isn't expected to adore the healer indefinitely.
Exactly. Or constantly validate them outside the agreed exchange. That clarity is transformative. It stops that subtle creep of obligation or future disappointment.
That makes a lot of sense. What's another example?
Another really powerful element is building in a brief, conscious check-in on power dynamics. Right at the start, maybe even in the first consultation.
How would that sound?
The healer might explicitly affirm the client's own inner healer, their innate wisdom, their autonomy, reminding them that the ultimate power for healing lies within them, not solely with the facilitator.
Okay. Empowering the client from the get-go.
Yes. And at the same time, the client consciously acknowledges the healer as a skilled facilitator, a guide, a conduit. But importantly, not a fixer, not a savior, not an infallible guru.
So that kind of direct, transparent dialogue, even just a few sentences.
It can nip projection in the bud, as Aima puts it. It brings those unconscious dynamics right to the surface immediately, or at least it brings awareness to them when they inevitably arise during the work.
Reinforcing that core truth. We are equal partners in the eyes of spirit.
Exactly. That dialogue creates a safe space for those often awkward or confusing feelings to be acknowledged, rather than festering. It dismantles the hierarchical imbalance that so often corrupts these dynamics.
You know, thinking about incorporating that kind of clear intention setting, that upfront dialogue, not just in spiritual work, but in any significant relationship.
Yeah.
How could that transform our interactions generally?
It challenges us all to be more transparent, doesn't it? More accountable, more authentically connected.
Definitely.
Ultimately, this shadow side of spiritual service, all the egos, the wounds, the expectations, dancing in the dark, it's not something to be afraid of, or repressed, or avoided.
It's something to eliminate.
Precisely, to bravely illuminate. You know the saying, the shadow is not bad, it is simply unseen.
Right.
So by consciously seeing, naming, acknowledging these energetic distortions, whether it's burnout, projection, trauma bonding, entitlement, we create the possibility to heal them, individually and collectively.
Stepping out of secrecy, out of martyrdom.
And stepping into radical transparency, genuine balance, profound integrity.
In this journey from distortion back to alignment. It's personal, but it's also collective.
Deeply personal requires huge courage, but also profoundly collective, as the Wakamatsu approach really emphasizes. It asks for humility.
Like the indigenous elder offering cornmeal, acknowledging their place.
Exactly. It requires discernment.
Like the therapist recognizing their own inner child, their triggers.
Yes, so they don't project, and it demands courage.
Like the seeker daring to look behind the guru's mask and see a fellow human. Flaws and all.
And still love the journey, yes.
So it requires, above all,
what we could powerfully call love with boundaries, compassion grounded in truth. Loving enough to be clear, to set healthy limits, to insist on integrity and energetic balance in every single exchange, knowing that true love, true healing can only flourish where truth resides. Hashtag outro.
Wow, what a deep dive that was. We've really covered some ground today.
We certainly have. It's a rich topic.
We've explored how these sacred soul contracts, meant for growth, can get distorted by trauma, scarcity, unconscious stuff. We looked at that incredible ancient wisdom from indigenous, African, Vedic traditions, offering antidotes through reciprocity, balanced exchange.
Timeless wisdom, really.
Definitely. And we brought in those Western psychological insights too, shining a light on modern shadows like burnout, projection, entitlement.
Bringing those perspectives together is crucial.
And crucially, we saw how powerfully reframing money, not as taboo, but as energetic consent, completely transform these vital, sometimes tricky exchanges.
Turning them into acts of conscious participation and integrity.
Yeah.
And, by embracing concepts like money as energetic consent, we really restore a key piece of truth that's often missing.
Which is?
That all parties in a healing exchange are active, vital, equally contributing partners. It's not a one-way street.
Right. Healer and seeker form a complete circuit.
A dynamic yin-yang of give and receive. And when that circuit flows cleanly, transparently, without obstruction, that's when you generate this powerful field, this sacred container.
Where real healing can happen.
Where genuine healing, profound transformation, maybe even what we call miracles, can truly occur. Because the energy is aligned.
So, as Aima Being's work reminds us, it's about moving from transactional relationships to relationships of trust.
Clarity, mutual respect, moving from fear-based contracts to conscious, sacred soul agreements.
And the Wakamatsu Approach Protocol, supported by all that ancient wisdom that came before, it invites all of us, really, to serve, to heal, to connect.
From wholeness.
From integrity, self-awareness, not from our wounds.
So a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe mull over this week.
Okay.
How can embracing this idea, love with boundaries, compassion grounded in truth and integrity, how can that not only protect these sacred spiritual exchanges, but also bring greater integrity, clarity, and maybe healing to all of your relationships?
Personal, professional, spiritual, all of them.
Exactly. What unseen shadow in your own life, perhaps in your own relationships or your work, might you choose to illuminate and bring into balance this week?
A powerful question to end on.